On today's World Insight, from war to climate change and humanitarian disasters, how can UN reform lead to better tackling the challenges we face today? Hear from Siddharth Chatterjee, UN Resident Coordinator in China.
The singular most important thing is political will. And then you have a people who are driven by that aspiration that they want to be.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. Today, let's continue our special interview series looking at UN's evolving role and the future of global governance under the theme United for the Future, the UN at 80. Over the past 8 decades, the United Nations has been a cornerstone of global collaboration and a driving force in China's development. From the early day cooperation to partnering in poverty alleviation and green sustainable development, its enduring partnership with China has consistently driven mutual progress and shared development. On that and more, I talked to Siddharth Chatterjee, UN Resident Coordinator in China. As the UN official based in Beijing, he has witnessed firsthand China's development and transformation through UN-China cooperation in tackling challenges and advancing global priorities. Let's take a look at this interview taking place in the UN compound in Beijing. Mr. Resident Coordinator, what a pleasure to see you here in the UN compound.
Thank you, Tian.
Now, 80th anniversary of the United Nations. So what do you see as the latest development of UN when it comes to its discussion about its future?
You know, Tianwei, the UN at 80 is very consequential. 80 years this organization has existed, given after the Second World War. But this is the first time, post the Second World War, that we are seeing an interlocking crisis. Not one crisis, but multiple crises. Let's do a stock take of these crises. Crisis number one, we saw a health pandemic. A health pandemic that exposed the fragility of human health and health systems across the world. It didn't matter how advanced a country was or how poor a country was. This microscopic virus impacted human beings. And not just that, it also impacted global economy. In fact, it rivals the Great Depression of the 1930s, the economic impact of this pandemic. The second crisis that we are confronting is a crisis of climate. It looms like the sword of the Damocles over our heads. A climate crisis which is an existentialist threat. We are seeing forest fires in some of the wealthiest parts of Los Angeles. We are seeing major floods across Europe. The climate crisis is real, and it is upending human life, it is upending livelihoods, and it is upending people into a state of flux with rising sea levels and all that. So it is a triple planetary crisis, a crisis of climate change, a crisis of biodiversity loss, as well as a crisis of air pollution. Third, conflicts. We are seeing an ongoing conflict in Gaza and Ukraine, but we have 80 ongoing conflicts going on across the world. In fact, the world is at war. That is again a major problem. Then we have a fourth, which is rising food insecurity. Nearly 3 billion people on the planet are food insecure. Every day, about 900 million people go to bed hungry. Every day. It's a major crisis. And number 5 is rising inequalities of the haves and the have-nots, and that's getting deeper and deeper. And these have consequences of social stability. Now, we've also reached a grim milestone of about 130 million people who have been displaced from their homes. This is the biggest displacement which has ever taken place. The displacement is because of conflict. The displacement is because of climate change. The displacement is because of instability, despondency, hopelessness. So people are leaving their homes. They're forced to. Who wants to leave their homes? While, Europe is grappling with the issue of forced migration, people need to understand that, look, why are these people leaving their homes and wanting to head to greener pastures? Only because of complete absence of hope. So this polycrisis is happening all at the same time. In fact, over the last 4-5 years, we've seen a convergence of this crisis. So therefore, the UN Secretary General launched the Summit of the Future. in 2024 with the perspective that the UN has to change.
What helps UN's mission to get things done?
Well, this is precisely why the Secretary General launched the Summit of the Future. And if you look at the overarching aims of the Summit of the Future, it's like the Renaissance, you know, the Renaissance of the Catholic Church that took place in the 15th, 16th century. The Secretary General is virtually trying to reform the UN to be fit for purpose for the context that we were. We can't be the UN of 1945, nor can we be the UN of 1990. We have to be a UN which is fit for purpose for the context it's in. So therefore, he focused on global governance. He focused on peace and security. He focused on the SDGs and to accelerate them. Yes, we are at 17% implementation. He's focused on AI and science technology. And the most important one, Tian, he's focusing on the youth and younger generations and their future generations. Right. What kind of a planet they're going to inherit.
The question is, how will all of this bigger picture filter down to UN in China, which is your daily work, Sid?
So this is why over the last 5 years, my purpose has been to fully align the UN in China to the vision of the Secretary General. A UN which delivers as one, a UN which is fit for purpose, and a UN which is in lockstep with the ambitions of the country's development agenda, which is what we've been aligned to with the 14th five-year plan and our cooperation framework with China.
I would love to go into some details of this. Sure. For example, SDGs. That's one of the things of your work here. Yeah. And we know globally it's very much lagging behind the achievements vis-a-vis the ambitions. Right. Now, what does that mean for your cooperation with China? What is China's role in fulfilling its responsibilities regarding SDGs?
China, first of all, has done remarkably well on the SDGs, and I'm proud to be the UN resident coordinator. It is a true privilege to be here in China and to see the dramatic changes that this country has made, not just in the last 5 years of my being here. And it has shown that how the convergence of political will, of the right public policies and the right partnerships has lifted nearly 800 million people out of abject poverty and is also feeding 1/5 of the world's population with 9% of the world's arable land. Now, this itself is a big step forward to the global efforts of eradicating poverty. But above that, what China has been able to do is to have invested in human capital. It invested in infrastructure. It invested in business. In fact, I say this to all the ambassadors from the developing South. When I meet with them and we discuss South-South cooperation, these are the 3 critical investments to move a country forward, which is what China has done.
Now, there are very different views in the world, as you know, regarding a rising country such as China. And many would ask whether you say these things only because you're sitting in the chair of resident coordinator in China and therefore you say what is needed. Yeah. Or is it your own observations through your life and work here? Which one is it?
I have been in the UN system for 29 years, Tian. I know the system. I've worked in 13 other countries. China is the 13th country I'm working in. And most of the countries I've actually worked in are very fragile states. Somalia, South Sudan, Iraq, Sudan, you know. So I've been there. I can say that what China has done in transforming itself as a nation state, as a people, is remarkable. It has challenges, without a doubt. One of the biggest challenges that I see is the rapid demographic transition, which will affect China into the longer term, which needs to be corrected, and that is why the three-child policy, etc., is in place. It is aging. But you know what? Aging should not be seen as a disadvantage. It could actually prove to be an advantage because you can actually have a healthy adult elderly population, and that is why I fully applaud President Xi Jinping's efforts on the Healthy China 2030. I think China needs to really focus on the Healthy China 2030 initiative for the simple reason that it has challenges of chronic diseases, and chronic diseases does not allow the kind of economic growth and prosperity that China is aspiring to by 2035 to have 800 million people living in as a moderately prosperous society, 800 million people as the middle class with 400 million that are already there. So a focus on healthy China would actually benefit China. I see the SDG 3 or universal health coverage as the anchor today for the success of all the SDGs. A healthy population is an economically productive population and a progressive country.
There has been a lot of discussions, Mr. Resident Coordinator, that China as a developing country and yet has already reached a certain economic stage. It has become one of the largest economies in the world. So how to treat China within the UN system? Is it a developing country, or should be treated as relatively a big power? How does that work?
So there are certain fundamental figures of the World Bank and the UN on what is classified as a fully developed country. China is not a developed country. It is still a developing country. It's a large economy. But that is why the 14th and the 15th five-year plan is focusing on urban to rural disparities. It is focusing on the multi-dimensional parts of poverty. Poverty is not just abject poverty. Poverty can be in terms of access to all the basic services. So what China is trying to do is making sure that is aligned. China is working hard on multiple parts of the SDGs, which includes the climate agenda and these things that are relevant to people's progress. So in the current context, and as we've just completed the signing of the new cooperation framework between the UN and China, which is from 2026 to 2030, I would imagine that before 2030, China's per capita GDP would have risen to the threshold that is needed to go into the high income category, just like we have the UN presence in Saudi Arabia as well. So as these countries progress, then the UN's role will change. But at this present moment, and don't forget, China is not a small country with a population of 1.4 billion people. There are still issues that need to be addressed, and that is precisely why the entire UN family is here. And we've had all our country program documents which went through flawlessly at the UN headquarters in terms of our support structure to China's growth.
What is the biggest highlights of that for the next 5 years?
Our cooperation framework from 2026 to 2030 is fully in lockstep with China's 15th five-year plan. So as you see, the 15th five-year plan will be published. It is very much aligned to that. But we have put people at the center. We have put prosperity at the center. We have put progress at the center. We have put the environment and planet at the center of our discussions. And above all, we have put partnerships, because we see China's immense role in further advancing South-South cooperation, making sure that we are able to share China's experiences with many other countries which are aspiring to get out of poverty, end hunger and all that. One of the things that we can today bring from China is what took China 40 years, 45 years. We now have much more knowledge. We have much more innovation. We have much more technology to allow many of these countries to leapfrog and do it faster. So I see so many opportunities, and this is where I see the role of the United Nations system. Me as the UN resident coordinator, together with all the 28 agencies, funds and programs, is to provide a platform on which we can convene, on which we can connect, and we can catalyze partnerships and relationships to add velocity to the growth of the global south.
Talking about your cooperation with your colleagues here in UN system in China, it's a complicated work, I have to say, Mr. RC. How do you cooperate with your colleagues here from different UN agencies right here?
The Secretary General, when he came in 2017, he came in with a mandate saying he will reform the UN. The UN resident coordinator existed before that also, but it was the resident coordinator. I was the resident coordinator in Kenya, but I was also the resident representative of UNDP in Kenya.
Indeed.
What the Secretary General
did. It was 2 in 1 at that time.
It was 2 in 1. It was double-hatted. And somehow it wasn't ideal. It wasn't fit for purpose. And that is why the Secretary General separated it and had the resident coordinator report directly into him. Therefore, I represent the Secretary General to the UN and to the Chinese government. Now, it has actually made the work much more effective. Of course, it also is about the individual's attributes as a resident coordinator and how he or she gets along with the leadership of the group.
From peace and development to sustainable development goals,
各国要以改革创新激发发展潜力。
the UN has been a key stage for international governance and common aspirations. As the UN embraces its 80th anniversary, it's also becoming a crucial goal to understand where the world is heading for. Join us for interviews and discussions on the UN and the future of international governance. Is this a reflection, on the other hand, of the global governance structure changes as we speak? For example, voices coming from the global south. For example, when the UN is being dismissed by some, it is also being treasured by many others. How is this reflecting the bigger picture, Mr. Resident Coordinator?
So, you know, as there's a Chinese saying that in every crisis lies an opportunity. This is that opportunity for change, Tian. You know, many Secretary Generals have tried to reform the UN. It's not been easy. I think the current crisis has also given us that opportunity to actually undergo that change. But as you know, that Antonio Guterres, our Secretary General, has been laser focused on making sure that the UN is fit for purpose. In fact, one of his greatest achievements is the resident coordinator system, which is being widely appreciated across countries where there is a resident coordinator system. And his deputy, Amina Mohammed, holds every resident coordinator to task. She says we have to deliver on the SDGs, regardless of the size of the country, scale of the country, what needs to be done. Right. And she says something quite remarkable, which we all believe in. She says, the UN and you as an individual must flip the orthodoxy. We cannot do it as business as usual. We have to bring in new innovations, new ideas, new partnership to help the country scale in its ambition.
China recently has been proposing different initiatives to support the United Nations and the global governance. For example, the Global Development Initiative, Global Security, Global Civilization Initiatives, and recently Global Governance Initiative. People that I've been talking to around the world have been telling me this is right on time, especially on Global Governance Initiative, when the world's governance system is being fragmented and dismissed by some. Now, as the resident coordinator of the United Nations in China, how do you feel the temperature? And how do you see these important voices coming from China and other parts of the global south can be eventually become mainstream support for the UN system to reform and to get better future?
You know, Tianwei, any member state that comes up with an initiative that gives a boost to the Sustainable Development Goals, any member state that gives a boost to the global governance system, any member state that gives a boost to the United Nations or to the multilateral system is a welcome initiative. So right from the very beginning, when the Global Development Initiative was introduced in late 2021, I was a vocal advocate of that, and the Secretary General has also been very clear that the Global Development Initiative has great potential to accelerate and give a boost to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is our common North Star. The Secretary General has been equally clear. I was with him at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Tianjin, where this initiative was announced, where the initiative of the Global Governance Initiative is really putting the UN at the core of this change. The Secretary General has welcomed this initiative.
And recently, right before the UNGA, he reiterated his stance in New York.
Indeed. And just recently, he was also at an initiative hosted by the Chinese government, where he was invited to join the premier on a discussion around the Global Development Initiative, and he made very, very important and favorable remarks to that.
And the Global Development Initiative can be an important mechanism to help accelerate progress on the 2030 agenda around the world.
So I feel that the Global Development Initiative is an initiative long needed, and I hope more member states come up with initiatives such as this, so that we can really move the needle forward, given our woefully inadequate implementation rate of the Sustainable Development Goals, given the fact that we need about $4 trillion annually to start to move the needle forward, to start to accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals. Now imagine more like-minded countries like China join up and start to come up with these initiatives that could have a massive impact, because ultimately it is all about lifting up humanity. It is all about human development, and it is all about our shared humanity.
There has been talks about the UN, whether it is still important or not, whether it is doing its jobs or not, whether it is still relevant or not. You see that a lot in some of the media coverages. So as resident coordinator in China for the UN, Sid, what is your observation of common folks here in China? How do they see the UN? I know you have been one of the most active, shall I say, members of the UN community here in China. You've been with the Chinese people, you go to the local parks, you have a podcast to feature some of the interesting people here and visiting here. So what is your take?
You know, the UN in China started its journey here in 1979. In fact, the premises in which you're sitting right now was given to the UN in 1979 by the Chinese government. So it has great significance. I believe that the Chinese people deeply value the UN system because we have been in this journey with them as a net aid contributor, giving them ideas on poverty eradication, giving them ideas on agriculture, on irrigation, on health, on water, on a variety of aspects. What they did was they embraced it, imbibed it, innovated around it, and accelerated it. And this is what has brought China up, that within 4 decades, such progress has been made. It is historical, but it is because of that big convergence. Because, Tianwei, you know, like I said, I've been to many countries around the world. The singular most important thing is political will. And then you have a people who are driven by that aspiration that they want to be better off. They want to improve the quality of lives of their children. They want to have hope into the future. I see this across China. There's a sense of dignity, there's a sense of pride, and I hope that we could copy and paste some of this and take it to some of the places where there is a loss of hope, there is absolute despondency. So China fills me with a sense of deep aspirations that what we can do here as the UN and share this with others, which is what we've been doing over the last 4 years. In fact, recently, even with the earthquake in Myanmar, I was able to sit down with the UN country team in Myanmar across on a video call. We were joined by the China International Development Cooperation Agency. We were joined by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China on what we could rapidly do to support the country team in the earthquake response. We've done similar things in 2022 with the Embassy of Pakistan. You know, we've done similar things with Sri Lanka. So we see the UN's role as a true multilateral system. And like I said, this would not have been possible without the strong support, of course, of my boss, the Secretary General, the host government in which I'm working in, but certainly the level of trust and relationships that we as a UN country team have built with the entire membership here in China of all the ambassadors and embassies which are present here, because ultimately we are a membership organization.
The engagement of the United Nations here has been deep over the decades, which reminds me of a wonderful event likely to take place in China very soon, the International Women's Conference 30 years ago. Groups coming from all over the world joined women here in China and also brought in something that is wonderful for decades to come. It was at the International Women's Conference 30 years ago that things were being clearly said, such as women's rights are human rights. Right. And now, 30 years later, we are going to see China together with friends all over the world celebrating that moment and that declaration. As the UN resident coordinator, I know you are very proud of the moments then and now. Tell me more as to how the UN system is likely to be activated to support these events and many others that are really marking progress of human development.
So this is one of the most consequential conferences that we are having, Tianwei. I think China should be proud of itself that back in 1995 it hosted this conference where many countries all over the world were skeptical about it. But I think we've come a long way. That is precisely why we have an SDG goal number 5. If you look at the first 5 goals, it's the unfinished business. So we need to make sure SDG goal number 5, which is all about gender equality, is manifest into our future progress. But most importantly, I think China can also be proud about the fact that it has the largest number of women in the labor force in the world, which is what gave China that opportunity to progress. It's microeconomics. When you have a man and a woman both working, there is more disposable income. You achieve a demographic dividend when there are more people employed and less dependence. What you had was fewer children, better investment in education, better investment in health, better investment in opportunity that led to a human capital growth which was exponential, which is why when we are looking in the space of artificial intelligence or quantum computing or semiconductors, fintech, biotech, you have Chinese science really driving that. The reason is that investment in human capital which started earlier and the fact that women were part of the labor force. So therefore, I think, when the famous saying of women hold up half the sky was actually translated from a saying into reality here in China.
And may I say, you play a very active role that is widely recognized.
But I have also been lucky, Tian. I've been lucky because, first of all, I've had a very supportive national government that has supported me in my role. Number two, I've been blessed with an extremely wise, experienced and talented group of heads of agencies who see the value proposition of working together, coming together. We are all equals. What I have been blessed by is the camaraderie and the teamwork which has come into play over here. And number three, I'm equally blessed by having a very, very talented young team that supports me in my role in the resident coordinator's office. And they are 95% of them are Chinese and highly talented individuals. But I can tell you something very proudly is that from my office here in China, over the last 5 years, 6 of my national staff have become internationals. And I'm very proud of. We are actually the only country office RCO in the world with that many. And one more thing, we're the only RCO in the world where we have actually been working with elements of the Chinese government, whether it's from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or NDRC or MOFCOM, to guide and groom a talented pool of staff amongst them to become future leaders inside the United Nations systems, other multilateral organizations, because we see a great promise there. China is a strong believer in the proposition of multilateralism. Also, it is highly underrepresented. This is an issue which has been taken up both with the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General by the Chinese government. I said, how do we fix this? And I realized there was lack of knowledge and absence of knowledge, and I decided I will use the resources of my office to fill that knowledge gap. Today, I can proudly say we have a Chinese candidate who's the resident coordinator in Botswana, and we have a Chinese national who's the resident coordinator in Maldives. In Maldives. And we have a resident representative who actually moved from here in UNDP in Belarus. Wow. And we are getting increasing number of those that we have trained who are getting into not just resident coordinator roles, but getting into the UN system from different avenues. So we are very proud of this track record in our office that we are being in that process of being much fit for purpose and building up the human capital and the knowledge that is needed to take this forward.
Sid and Mr. Resident Coordinator, what a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Tian.
That's my exclusive interview with Siddharth Chatterjee, the UN Resident Coordinator in China. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.